The decision did not arrive with thunder, yet it struck the palace like a storm. Behind closed doors, the Privy Council delivered a ruling so precise, so personal, and so devastating that every corridor in Windsor seemed to fall silent. Princess Charlotte, still young but already bound to history, was declared the sole authority over the Queen's Reserve Jewels Suite, and nothing inside the monarchy felt untouched. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William received the sealed ruling before anyone else in the family rooms. He stood in a quiet anteroom with Catherine beside him, one hand resting on the folder, as though the paper itself carried heat. The Privy Council, the monarch's formal advisory body that confirms important royal and constitutional decisions, had not issued a soft recommendation. It had delivered a binding judgment. Charlotte alone would hold authority over the Queen's Reserve Jewels Suite, meaning no competing household could control its use, movement, display, or ceremonial future. Catherine watched his face tighten as he reached the words that changed everything: sole authority. Those two words did not simply protect jewels, they protected memory. The Queen's Reserve Jewels Suite, a private collection kept apart from ordinary royal ornaments because of its personal connection to the late monarch, had become a battlefield of legacy. The pieces were not only diamonds, pearls, and sapphires. They were rank, remembrance, and Elizabeth's final whisper from behind the grave. William did not speak at first. He read the page again, slower this time, while Catherine stood close enough to understand the fear beneath his silence. Their daughter had been lifted into a symbolic position far beyond childhood. Charlotte was not being handed treasure, she was being handed responsibility, and the prince knew the world would not see the difference. Catherine felt pride rise in her chest, then fear followed quickly after it. A child's name had become a palace boundary. A senior secretary entered with careful steps and asked whether the family wished to be briefed on appeal options. William looked up. The secretary closed the file, lowered his voice, and said there was no instruction for appeal. That answer carried its own warning. Charles would have to accept it. Camilla would have to face it. Senior officers would have to obey it. The old channels had closed. The news began moving from the council chamber toward the family rooms, quiet but unstoppable. By evening, the ruling was no longer just a document. It was a test of loyalty, pride, and pain. But before the ruling could reshape the monarchy, it first had to pass through the hearts of the people most wounded by its meaning. Charlotte did not ask for power, yet power arrived at her name. In one ruling, the palace was forced to look at a young princess not only as William and Catherine's daughter, but as a guardian of Elizabeth's private legacy. For Charles, it was painful. For Camilla, it was humiliating. For William, it was a line drawn around his child that no one was allowed to cross. William carried the ruling back into the private rooms with the kind of silence Catherine understood immediately. He did not need to explain that something had shifted. She saw it in the way he held the file, careful but tense, as if one wrong movement might release the full force of what had just been decided. Charlotte had become the unexpected human center of a ruling that was larger than jewels. The young princess was now tied to pieces that carried Elizabeth's personal identity, her taste, her rank, her memory, and her quiet final judgment on who could be trusted with what she had left behind. Charles stood in a cruel place between monarchy and family. He knew the decision honored his mother's wishes, and that made it harder to challenge. Yet he also knew what it exposed inside his own household. The king could not pretend this was a harmless administrative matter. The ruling did not merely protect the Queen's Reserve Jewels Suite. It restricted who could request the pieces, who could approve their use, and who could present them at major state occasions. In plain terms, the collection was no longer open to pressure, sentiment, or royal habit. It now answered to Charlotte's authority through those appointed to guard her interests. Catherine listened as William spoke softly about their daughter becoming a symbol before she was old enough to understand the weight of symbolism. He feared the whispers, the expectations, the way palace history could wrap itself around a child and call it destiny. She felt the same ache. Pride was there, yes, but it stood beside fear. Charlotte was being protected, but protection itself had announced that danger existed. Camilla heard the wording from an aide and did not move. She sat motionless, wounded less by the diamonds than by the message beneath them. Elizabeth's most private circle had closed without her inside it. The queen consort understood the humiliation clearly. This was not a refusal of decoration. It was a refusal of intimacy, a palace verdict that placed memory beyond her reach. Then came the note, attached to the council file. A handwritten line suggested Elizabeth wanted the collection guarded through the direct line of remembrance. That phrase changed the mood again. The family could no longer pretend this was about diamonds alone. It was about legitimacy, memory, and who had the right to speak for the queen now. And the deeper they looked into Elizabeth's final intentions, the clearer it became that one forgotten moment had set everything in motion. Every royal rupture has a beginning, but this one began almost invisibly. Not in a courtroom, not in a televised speech. It began during a private Windsor ceremony, when one jewel was requested, one answer was delayed, and one witness understood that Elizabeth's legacy was no longer safe from quiet negotiation. That moment, later whispered about as the Windsor sapphire incident, became the trigger no one could ignore. Catherine sensed the danger before anyone named it. The ceremony had been arranged as a quiet royal occasion, the kind that usually moved through the palace with polished order and no public tremor. Yet behind that calm, a single request had been made for one of Elizabeth's reserved sapphire pieces, and the answer had not gone through Charlotte's household. That detail mattered, because the Queen's reserved jewels suite was no longer treated as ordinary royal decoration. It had become a protected legacy, tied to the late monarch's private wishes and to the young princess's future place in the family. William heard the aide's explanation and changed instantly. He did not raise his voice, but Catherine saw the betrayal settle across him. The prince asked one careful question. Had Charlotte's name been consulted at any point? The aide hesitated. That pause told him more than any confession could. If a jewel connected to his daughter's future authority could be requested through ordinary channels, then the whole promise around Charlotte was vulnerable. Not broken yet, but exposed. Catherine understood why his anger ran so deep. This was not only inheritance, it was dignity. It was the right of a child not to have her future quietly negotiated by people who believed old habits still mattered more than written intention. William felt the wound personally because Charlotte was not in the room to defend herself. She could not challenge procedure. She could not read the hidden meanings inside palace language, so he had to do it for her. Then the discovery came. A private memorandum from Elizabeth's archive was found, and its wording changed the entire temperature of the dispute. A memorandum is a written record used to preserve instructions or decisions, and this one stated that certain jewels were never again to be treated as general royal property. They were to be guarded through Charlotte's line, protected from informal pressure, and separated from the reach of household convenience. William read the document twice. Catherine watched him fall silent, because the meaning was clear. The Windsor sapphire incident had not created the conflict. It had revealed it. The request, the delay, the bypassed name, the recovered memorandum. Together, they formed the point of no return. Once that paper reached the Privy Council, tradition could no longer hide what had happened. That face-to-face moment came sooner than anyone expected, and it turned a legal decision into a family fracture. The confrontation did not happen before cameras, but it carried the force of a public declaration. William entered the private sitting room with the ruling in his hand, while Camilla waited near the fireplace, already aware that the conversation would not be gentle. Charles stood between them, silent and pale. Then William placed the document on the table, and the room changed forever. William did not sit down immediately. He let the silence do what words could not. The prince had come to make one thing clear. Charlotte's authority over the reserved jewels suite was no longer a matter for private persuasion, palace habit, or emotional appeal. A Privy Council ruling, meaning a formal decision from the monarch's highest advisory body, had now placed the collection beyond ordinary household control. This was not a family preference. This was a command, wrapped in law, memory, and Elizabeth's final intention. Camilla looked at the document as if it had been written to wound her personally. She asked the question no one else dared to say aloud. Did this mean she, the queen consort, would now have to seek permission through a child's household before wearing pieces connected to the late queen? William chose his answer with extreme care. He did not attack her. He did not soften the truth either. He said it meant Elizabeth's instruction would be honored exactly as written. Charles lowered his eyes. The king felt the room closing around him, because every answer cut in two directions. To defend Camilla too strongly would look like resistance against his mother's recorded wishes. To accept William's position too quickly would leave his wife standing alone in humiliation. He knew the ruling had struck deeper than jewels. It had exposed the painful distance between marriage, monarchy, and memory. William opened the folder again and revealed the part that made the decision impossible to bend. Any future ceremonial use of the jewels would have to pass through Charlotte's appointed guardians until she came of age. A guardian, in this context, meant an adult legally trusted to protect a child's interests until that child was old enough to decide for herself. Catherine and William would not be decoration around the ruling. They would be its shield. Camilla pushed back, her voice controlled but wounded. She argued that royal life could not function if every historic piece became trapped behind family tension. William closed the folder before she finished. That small movement carried the force of a final answer. The council had left no space for interpretation, no quiet exception, no softened arrangement, no private understanding that could erase the words sole authority. Camilla stood, and Charles did not stop her. The door closed behind the queen consort, with a sound that seemed to divide the palace in two. Emotion had done its damage, but now control would decide what came next, because the ruling had wounded pride, but its true power lay in the machinery now forming around Charlotte's name. Power in the monarchy rarely announces itself loudly. It moves through signatures, keys, schedules, and locked rooms. After the ruling, Charlotte's authority became protected by a small circle of guardians, each chosen not for spectacle but for loyalty. Catherine watched the list being read aloud, and with every name, she understood that her daughter was being shielded from a palace that had already tested the boundary once. Catherine felt the relief first, then the sorrow. The new structure placed William and herself at the center of Charlotte's protection until their daughter reached maturity, meaning until she was old enough to carry legal and personal responsibility for the Queen's reserve jewels suite herself. A guardian, in this royal context, was not simply a caretaker. It was someone trusted to defend a child's rights when others might try to bend them through pressure, tradition, or private influence. That was why every name on the list mattered. Loyalty had become a wall. William listened without interruption as the rules were read aloud. The jewels would now sit under stricter access protocol, a formal system controlling who could request, borrow, display, or move them. No household could touch them without written approval. No senior aide could rely on old privilege. No ceremonial planner could pretend the ruling was just a quiet technicality. The prince understood the triumph and the cost at the same time. Each line made Charlotte safer, but each line also pushed the family further apart. Catherine looked down when one clause was explained in full. Informal royal requests would no longer be accepted. That meant no private plea, no emotional appeal, no carefully worded message from another household could replace legal authority. She knew exactly why that sentence had been included. The Windsor sapphire incident had exposed how easily a child's future could be stepped around when people spoke in soft voices and acted as though tradition excused everything. William signed the first acknowledgement page with controlled restraint. His hand did not shake, but Catherine knew the weight behind the movement. The signature strengthened Charlotte's place, yet it also confirmed that the old trust inside the palace had fractured. The prince was not just approving procedure, he was drawing a line around his daughter's name and daring anyone to cross it again. Then a palace officer delivered the revelation that made the room go still. A duplicate access key once held by another household had been deactivated. The officer said it plainly, but the meaning hit hard. The system was no longer symbolic. It was sealed. Catherine breathed slowly as the final page closed. Charlotte had protection now, real protection. But every sealed door created someone on the outside. Camilla would not feel that exclusion in a private memo. She would feel it where royal humiliation always cuts deepest, in public. The first consequence arrived not as an argument, but as a missing jewel case at a ceremony where everyone knew what had been denied. The fallout began with absence. At a formal palace reception, a velvet case that had once been prepared without hesitation remained locked, untouched, and unavailable. Camilla stood dressed for the evening, waiting for confirmation that never came. When the dresser finally lowered her eyes, the Queen understood the new reality. Charlotte's authority was no longer private paperwork. It had entered the room. Camilla knew something was wrong before anyone explained it. The timing had changed. The usual quiet confidence around royal preparation had vanished, replaced by careful voices and nervous pauses. One of Elizabeth's reserved pieces had been requested for ceremonial wear, a kind of formal royal appearance where jewels are not just decoration, but signals of rank, continuity, and approval. In the past, such a request might have moved through familiar household channels. Now, every person involved understood that the old path had been blocked. The dresser held the message like it was dangerous. Household staff had been instructed to follow the ruling exactly, and that mattered because this was the first true test of Charlotte's new authority. The Queen's reserved jewels suite could no longer be handled as a matter of convenience. Written approval was required. Guardian authorization was required. Without it, even senior status could not open the case. Camilla waited for the softened phrase, the polite exception, the small royal workaround that would spare her embarrassment. None came. The refusal note was brief, cold, and devastating. Reserved suite access denied pending guardian authorization. Camilla read it once, then again, and the humiliation reached her before anger did. She removed her gloves slowly and sat at the dressing table without speaking. For several seconds, the silence became heavier than any argument. The Queen Consort had been denied, not in public words, but in private procedure, and that made the blow sharper. It meant the system was working exactly as William had said it would. Charles entered moments later and saw the empty velvet case. He understood instantly. The king looked at Camilla, then at the note, and the conflict inside him returned with cruel force. His wife's pain was real. Her embarrassment was real. But so was the ruling. So was Elizabeth's instruction. So was Charlotte's place at the center of it all. Charles could comfort Camilla, but he could not undo what had now been enforced. Word moved quickly through the household. This was the first time the new order had directly changed the appearance of a senior royal. The absence became the message. Camilla stepped into the reception without the jewel, and everyone who understood palace language knew what had been denied. The ruling had become visible, and visibility changes everything. Yet the turning point would not come in a reception hall, but in a quiet room where William and Charles finally stopped speaking as prince and king. For days, the palace spoke in rules. Then, at last, two men spoke as father and son. Charles asked William to meet him privately, without secretaries, without advisors, without the cold protection of official language. The room was small, the hour was late, and for the first time since the ruling, the pain beneath the decision was allowed to breathe. Charles did not begin with anger. That surprised William more than any accusation could have. The king looked tired, not defeated, but worn down by the impossible weight of standing between the woman he loved and the mother whose wishes still ruled the silence around them. He wanted to know the truth beneath the legal language. Had the ruling become a weapon against Camilla, or was it truly a shield around Charlotte? That question mattered, because the monarchy could survive a painful decision, but it could not survive a decision turned into private revenge. William answered slowly, because he understood the danger in every word. He told his father that he was not punishing anyone. He was protecting his daughter from confusion, pressure, and quiet manipulation. Charlotte, he said, should never grow up wondering whether her name could be ignored whenever palace convenience demanded it. The prince had watched the Windsor sapphire incident expose a weakness, and now he refused to let that weakness become her inheritance. The issue was not Camilla's pride. It was Charlotte's future dignity. Charles absorbed the answer in silence. He knew William was right, and that knowledge hurt him. The monarch had spent his life learning that duty often demanded sacrifice, but this sacrifice cut through his own household. Elizabeth's wishes still had the power to correct them all from beyond the grave. The late queen was not present, yet her intention had become the strongest voice in the room. Charles admitted it with sadness, not bitterness. His mother had drawn a line, and they had all arrived at it too late. Then William revealed the moment that had broken him. Charlotte had asked why everyone was whispering, not why people were angry, not why documents were being signed, just why everyone was whispering. That single question stripped away the politics, the ceremony, and the guarded phrases. Charles looked away, because he understood. A child had felt the tremor before anyone had explained the earthquake. Charles finally conceded what the palace had been avoiding. The ruling had to stand publicly, not only legally. Weakening it now would wound Charlotte more deeply, because it would teach every household that her authority could be softened under pressure. Father and son did not leave healed, but they left aligned. And once that happened, the palace could no longer hide the change behind closed doors. Once the family stopped resisting the ruling, the nation began deciding what it believed the ruling truly meant. By morning, the private ruling was no longer private. Britain woke to one image. A newspaper front page, showing a close photograph of Charlotte, beside the headline, "The Queen's Jewels Passed to the Future." It was not only a story about a young princess. It became a national argument about memory, womanhood, legitimacy, and whether Elizabeth had chosen the future over the present. Catherine saw the front page before Charlotte did, and that small mercy mattered more than anyone outside the family could understand. She turned the newspaper face down at breakfast, not out of shame, but out of fear. Her daughter had been made into a symbol overnight. The headline carried praise, but praise could still become pressure. The story framed Charlotte as the guardian of Elizabeth's most reserved jewels, and that mattered because the jewels were no longer being discussed as ornaments. They had become proof of trust, proof of bloodline, and proof that the late Queen's private wishes could still shape the living monarchy. William watched Charlotte laugh with her siblings in another room, and the contrast almost broke him. One moment, she was simply a child inside her own family. The next, she was being spoken of across the nation as the future keeper of a sacred royal memory. The prince knew public admiration could feel warm at first, but it could harden into expectation. He had seen that happen before. He understood how quickly affection could become ownership, especially when the person at the center was too young to answer back. Outside Buckingham Palace, the ruling became the only story anyone wanted to discuss. Broadcasters stood near the gates, as a small crowd gathered with flowers, handwritten notes, and cameras waiting for movement behind the walls. A broadcaster called it the clearest sign yet that Elizabeth's private legacy has skipped palace politics and landed with the next generation. That sentence spread quickly because it captured what people already felt. This was not just a jewel dispute. It was a public judgment on who had inherited the Queen's trust. Charles heard the broadcast summary and said nothing at first. The king understood that silence from the palace would look like weakness, but too much explanation would look like panic. So the response came controlled and firm. The ruling was acknowledged. The guardianship structure remained intact. No reversal would be pursued. Those words mattered because they told the country that the monarchy would not soften Charlotte's authority to protect anyone's pride. Camilla absorbed the public reaction with a wound that had already been opened in private. She knew the headline did not name her as the one left outside, but everyone who understood the palace understood the meaning. The nation now saw the shape of the decision. Yet the final meaning did not belong to newspapers, broadcasters, or crowds at palace gates. It belonged inside the family, where acceptance had to replace resistance. And when the noise outside faded, the verdict inside the monarchy became impossible to avoid. In the end, the ruling did not crown Charlotte with jewels. It surrounded her with responsibility. It did not destroy Charles, but it forced him to honor the mother whose shadow still measured the monarchy. It did not erase Camilla, but it reminded her that some doors were never hers to open. Above all, it proved that Elizabeth's private will still had a voice. Charles signed the final household acknowledgement quietly. He did not rush the moment, because every stroke of the pen carried the weight of a son yielding to his mother's last design. The household acknowledgement, a formal palace record confirming that every senior office accepts a decision, mattered because it moved the ruling beyond argument. The king could no longer treat it as a private wound or a passing family storm. By placing his name beneath it, He accepted that Charlotte's sole authority over the Queen's reserve jewels suite would remain protected through her guardians until she was ready to carry that responsibility herself. Camilla absorbed the outcome alone, and this time she did not fight it. The Queen Consort had been wounded by the message more than by the loss of access, because the decision had exposed a truth she could not soften. This particular inheritance was never meant to validate her place. It was never meant to repair old doubts or offer public reassurance. It belonged to Elizabeth's line of remembrance, and Camilla understood that some parts of the late monarch's heart had stayed closed to her, no matter how high her title had risen. William and Catherine moved with quiet purpose as the final copy was placed into Charlotte's protected file. A protected file, in simple terms, is a restricted royal record kept for matters involving inheritance, guardianship, and future authority. For the prince and the princess, that file changed meaning. It was no longer the center of scandal. It had become a promise. Their daughter would not inherit confusion. She would not inherit pressure disguised as tradition. She would inherit a guarded legacy, held steady until she could understand why Elizabeth had chosen her name. Charles rested the pen down with visible sadness, but the sadness did not undo the decision. The monarchy had accepted the ruling as part of Elizabeth's lasting design, not as a temporary dispute that could be softened later. That acceptance mattered because royal survival depends on continuity. If the palace weakened Charlotte's authority to spare embarrassment, then every future instruction from the past could be questioned, negotiated, and quietly undone. The final emotional truth became undeniable. The jewels were never the real prize. Authority was. Memory was. Elizabeth's trust was. This moment meant the monarchy had chosen continuity over convenience, Charlotte over compromise, and Elizabeth's final intention over palace pressure. The family was bruised, but the line was settled. The palace doors closed on a painful chapter, but this time they closed with the ruling accepted, the legacy protected, and Charlotte's place in royal history secured. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.